The boardroom on the 41st floor smelled like fresh paint and ambition. Mara Calloway, 38, had walked into this room 9 years ago with a rolled-up blueprint under one arm and a certified check folded in her blazer pocket. She had looked at the long mahogany table, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the afternoon light falling across everything like a benediction, and she had thought, quietly, without greed, "This is mine." She was still in that room tonight. But the man standing at the head of it, the man who had once slid his hand into hers and said, "We're doing this together," was announcing his engagement to someone else. And the room was applauding. Declan Calloway, 41, managing partner of Calloway Meridian Group, stood with his hand resting on the lower back of a woman named Priya Vance, 32 years old, the daughter of Warren Vance, founder of Vance Capital, a private equity firm that moved money the way rivers move water, quietly, constantly, in volumes most people couldn't visualize. Priya smiled at the assembled partners without discomfort. She had never been uncomfortable in her life. Mara watched from her seat, third chair from the end. She did not move. She did not change her expression. She held a pen loosely between two fingers and looked at Declan the way a civil engineer looks at a building they designed themselves, with complete familiarity and a calm, technical understanding of exactly where the stress fractures were. She did not cry. When Declan briefly met her eyes across the table, she gave him one slow nod, the kind you give a contractor when they deliver exactly what you expected, and she wrote something in the margin of the document in front of her. Nobody noticed. Nobody in that room ever really noticed Mara. That had always been the problem. And, as it turned out, the advantage. Welcome. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing your cities down in that section. Now let's get into this, because what Mara does next is something you will not see coming. Mara and Declan had met at a real estate conference in Atlanta 11 years ago. She was 27, fresh out of her master's in urban planning, carrying a specific idea for a boutique development model focused on mid-market commercial residential hybrid spaces. She had a vision, a plan, a network, and a family trust her grandmother Edith Calloway had spent 40 years quietly building from a chain of laundromats, a strip mall in suburban Ohio, and an early bank investment that paid out far more than anyone expected. Edith had died 4 years before that conference. She had left everything to Mara, the trust, the properties, the accumulated interest, because Mara was the only family member she believed had both the intelligence and the discipline to steward what she had built. The trust was structured deliberately. Mara was named sole trustee and sole beneficiary. No asset could be transferred without her signature in that capacity. Edith had paid a very good estate attorney named Hargrove Sims to make certain of it, because Edith distrusted improvisation. She believed the best protection for wealth was legal architecture, not sentiment. Mara had read every document in the trust before she turned 25. Declan had understood that Mara was sharp and that she had capital and that her idea was better than anything he'd been working on. He was charming in a manufactured way, the kind of handsome that comes from gym memberships and knowing which clothes communicate what you want people to believe about you. He could walk into a room full of investors and convince them that Mara's vision was not just viable, but inevitable. She was the architect. He was the public face. For nearly 7 years, it worked. Calloway Meridian Group was formed in the second year of their marriage. The founding capital, all of it, came from the Edith Calloway Revocable Trust, $2.3 million. Mara's signature on the founding documents was dual, once as managing director and once as trustee of the founding entity that held the majority equity stake. The trust held 54%. Declan held 11%. Earned through a vesting arrangement drafted by Mara's attorney, contingent on continued employment and contingent on something else. a forfeiture clause that specified equity could be partially or fully revoked in the event of any undisclosed conflict of interest. Declan had signed those documents. But Mara had a private theory about him, too useful to say aloud. Declan read documents the way people read menus at restaurants they've already decided on, scanning for confirmation, not information. He knew he had equity. He knew his name was on the door. He had stopped reading carefully long before he reached the clauses that mattered. He had also, in the 5th year of their marriage, stopped coming home before 9. And in the 6th year, started taking calls in the car. And in the early months of the 7th year, a woman named Priya Vance had begun appearing in photographs from industry events, first in the background, then beside him, then with her hand on his arm in the particular way that isn't accidental. Mara had seen those photographs. She had said nothing. She had started meeting with Nadia Osei. Nadia Osei was 40 years old, a corporate and estate attorney who had known Mara since graduate school. She processed information the way a chess player processes a board, quietly, completely, several moves ahead. She wore reading glasses on a chain and had the unhurried manner of someone who had seen enough courtrooms to know that panic never once helped anyone. She had reviewed Callaway Meridian's founding documents when the company was formed and had been Mara's private counsel ever since, separate from the company's general counsel, a firm Declan had selected himself. When Mara called Nadia in February and said, "I need you to walk me through the trust structure again, and then tell me what happens if I file," Nadia had not expressed surprise. She said, "I'll be at your office tomorrow morning. Bring the full founding documents and the most recent operating agreement. No questions about feelings. No unsolicited sympathy. Just the next practical step." Mara loved her for it. What they mapped out over the following 6 weeks was not revenge. Mara was deliberate about that framing. It was accurate resolution. A process of ensuring that what was Mara's remained Mara's, and that what Declan believed he owned was understood, by everyone involved, to be exactly what the documents said. Not a dollar more. The first thing they verified was the trust's controlling position. Still intact. 54%. Mara's signature, alone, required for any transfer. The second thing they verified was the forfeiture clause. Still enforceable. Clear language. Undisclosed conflicts of interest. Documented. The third thing required a different kind of research entirely. Declan had been in preliminary discussions with Warren Vance, Priya's father, about a potential acquisition of Callaway Meridian Group. For months of conversations. Not disclosed to the board. Not disclosed to Mara as trustee. Conducted as though Declan were the sole decision-making authority of a company in which he held 11%. Mara read the preliminary term sheet. Vance Capital was offering $48 million. Declan's share would have been approximately $5 million. The trust share, Mara's share, would have been approximately $25 million. And Declan had been negotiating it, as if her signature were a formality, as if the controlling stake were his to sell. She sat with that for a long time. Then she said, "He doesn't know I need to sign for the trust to transfer." Nadia looked at her over the reading glasses and said, "I don't believe he does. I believe he thinks your trustee's signature is equivalent to your wife's signature." Mara nodded slowly. She said, "Then there's no reason to correct that impression just yet." The divorce filing had been ready for 3 weeks when she finally served it. Timing, in Mara's experience, was not a detail. It was strategy. She needed Declan fully committed to the acquisition path before he discovered the problem. Needed him to have already told Warren Vance that Callaway Meridian was a clean target with no structural complications. She needed him to be so far forward that retreat would be humiliating. The filing was served the morning after the boardroom announcement. 8:47 a.m. A process server walked into the lobby and asked for Declan Callaway by name. The envelope was handed over in front of the receptionist, 2 junior associates waiting for the elevator, and a facilities manager fixing the air conditioning. Mara was not in the office. She was at Nadia's, reviewing trust documentation that would be filed with the court, documentation that would clarify, formally and for the public record, that the trust was the controlling shareholder, that Mara was the sole trustee, and that no transfer could happen without her individual authorization. Declan called 3 times. She did not answer. At 10:22, a text arrived. "We need to talk. Today. Please." She showed it to Nadia, who looked at it without expression and said, "Do you want to talk to him?" Mara said, "Not yet." She put the phone face down and kept reading. 3 days later, Declan came to the office early. Mara arrived at her usual time and found him outside her door in the dark navy suit he wore when he needed to feel in control, holding a coffee he wasn't drinking. She unlocked her door and walked in. He followed. He said, "You didn't have to do it that way. The process server. You could have called me." She said, "I did call you. A number of times, over a number of months. About a number of things." He rubbed the back of his neck. "There are things in motion right now. Business development conversations at a high level. The timing of this complicates things I've been working on." Mara said, "Bring them to the full board." "There's nothing wrong with the timing." He hesitated. A brief flicker she had spent 9 years learning to read. It meant, "I don't know how much she knows." He said, "I'd like to handle this personally before we make it official." Mara picked up her pen. She said, "I'm the managing director and the trustee of the controlling shareholder entity. If there are material business development conversations happening, I need to hear them in my official capacity. I'd suggest a board meeting next week. I'll have Nadia present as outside counsel." The color in his face shifted slightly. He said, "You don't need outside counsel in a board meeting." She said, "I do." A pause. "Is there anything else?" He stood there, working something through. Then he said, quietly, "You're going to make this hard." Mara looked at him without hostility or heat. She said, "I'm going to make it accurate. That's all." He left without closing the door. She turned back to her desk and kept working. Warren Vance was not a foolish man. He had built Vance Capital over 23 years and had the instincts that come from watching enough deals collapse in due diligence. When Declan came to him through Priya, those instincts had flagged something he couldn't yet name. Declan spoke about the company as if he owned it completely, as if he had built it from nothing. But Warren Vance had done enough research to know the founding entity was a trust in Mara's name alone. He had asked, casually, about the trust structure. Declan had said, "That's just a holding vehicle Mara set up. She'll sign when it's time." He said it easily, the way you say something you've thought about only enough to feel certain, not enough to actually know. After the divorce papers were served, Declan called Warren to reassure him. Everything was on track. Mara was cooperative. No complications. Warren had thanked him politely and then instructed his in-house counsel to request the full corporate structure documents immediately. He received them 4 days later. He read them himself. Then he asked for the trust instrument. The trust instrument was not on file with the company's general counsel. It had never needed to be. Trent Farley, Declan's chosen counsel, had reviewed the cap table and the operating agreement, but had apparently taken Declan's characterization of the trust at face value without requesting the actual document. Warren sent a formal request directly to Mara, in her capacity as trustee. It went to Nadia's office. Nadia called Mara. Mara said, "Send him everything." Nadia said, "Are you sure?" Mara said, "Warren Vance will figure this out one way or the other. Better from us, accurately, than from Declan's version." Nadia sent the trust instrument, the founding documents, the cap table analysis, and a clean summary memo. Precise, thorough, and impossible to misread. Warren Vance was quiet for most of Friday. That evening, his in-house counsel called Trent Farley for clarification on the trust transfer. Trent called Declan that same night. If you're still watching, drop a comment right now that says, "Still here." I want to see who's following this because we're about to hit the part where everything unravels, and I promise you, you don't want to miss what happens at that conference. Declan called Mara at 11 p.m. She let the first 2 calls ring. On the third, she answered. He said her name. She said nothing. He said, I need you to sign the transfer consent as trustee. The deal is $48 million. Your share is $25 million. You'd walk away with $25 million, Mara. That's the number. Sign it. She said, that's what you've been negotiating. He said, it's a good deal. I need you to sign. She said, I'm not going to sign tonight. He said, when? Not a question. A demand shaped like one. She said, I'll have Nadia reach out to Warren Vance directly next week to discuss the terms. He said, the terms are set. She said, not for the trust. A long silence. She could hear him breathing. She said, good night, Declan. And she ended the call. Nadia's meeting with Warren Vance happened the following Tuesday at Nadia's firm. Mara was present. Declan was not invited. And this was the first moment the true shape of the situation became visible to him. He had assumed that any meeting about the acquisition would center on him. He showed up anyway, arriving 12 minutes early, telling the receptionist he was there for the Vance meeting. Nadia came out herself. She looked at him without surprise and said, this meeting is between the trust and Vance Capital. You're welcome to wait in the lobby. Mara will speak with you after. Declan stood in the lobby for the entire hour, and 12 minutes the meeting ran. He held a paper cup of water and he waited. In the lobby of his own wife's attorney's firm, while the woman he had assumed was simply the quiet half of his operation sat across a conference table from Warren Vance and explained, with precision and complete authority, that she was the controlling party, that the terms required independent evaluation, and that the acquisition could not proceed without her direct involvement going forward. Warren Vance, to his credit, responded directly. He said, the terms were negotiated based on representations that were clearly incomplete. He looked at Mara and said, what do you need to feel comfortable going forward? She said, two things. First, that I'm the primary party for the trust's position in all future negotiations. Second, that an independent valuation is completed before any term sheet is finalized. She paused. I'd also appreciate transparency about whatever timeline has been communicated to you, because I suspect the urgency doesn't reflect anything structural. It reflects a personal situation someone has an interest in resolving quickly. Warren Vance studied her for a moment. The quiet, complete study of a man who had heard many stories and learned to read the space between the words. He said, we're not in a hurry, Miss Calloway. We're interested in the right deal, not the fast one. She nodded once. Then we'll get along fine. The independent valuation came back at $61 million. $12 million more than the figure Declan had been negotiating from. Two properties had appreciated significantly, and a licensing agreement Mara had negotiated quietly in the background. A national partnership with a mid-market retail chain for co-developed commercial anchors had added value the original analysis had never reflected. The $48 million figure was based on a preliminary assessment nearly 8 months old. Warren Vance called Mara after receiving the valuation. He said, were you aware of the licensing agreement during the initial discussions? She said, I negotiated it. He said, and it wasn't disclosed. She said, not by me. A brief pause. He said, I appreciate your directness. She said, I think it serves us both. The revised term sheet came 10 days later. $61 million. The trust share, $32.9 million. And then came the forfeiture. Nadia had filed the notice with the company's board in connection with the divorce proceedings, citing the undisclosed acquisition negotiations as a material breach of fiduciary duty. Trent Farley, Declan's own chosen counsel, reviewed the operating agreement and advised him that the clause was enforceable as written. The breach was documented. The forfeiture was valid. Declan's 11% equity was gone. The shares reverted to the company, effectively back into the trust's controlling position. He retained a litigation attorney, then a second one. Both gave him the same answer. The clause was clear, the breach was documented, and not understanding a clause you signed is not, under any reading of the law, a defense. The public moment. the one that completed everything, did not happen in a courtroom or a boardroom. It happened at the Mid-Market Real Estate Development Forum in Chicago, an industry event they had both attended for 6 consecutive years. Declan was on a panel about acquisition strategy. Mara was the keynote speaker at the closing dinner, a booking made 8 months prior that Declan had apparently not thought deeply about, because the closing dinner was where the entire conference gathered. One room, no separate track. He was seated near the front when she approached the podium. Priya Vance was beside him, attending on behalf of her father's firm. Mara saw them before she reached the microphone and gave them neither extra attention nor any sign of discomfort. She looked out at the 300 people in the room the way she always looked at a space before she began, measuring it, understanding it, deciding what it needed. She said, "I want to talk tonight about what it actually takes to build something in this industry. Not the pitch version, the real version." She paused, because the pitch version leaves out the most important part: who controls what? And our industry has a remarkable tendency to answer that question by looking at whoever is in front of the room, rather than whoever built it. For 28 minutes, she spoke about structural ownership, about trust-held equity, about valuation gaps created by undisclosed negotiations, about operating agreement clauses, and what happens when they're ignored. She spoke about a licensing deal negotiated in the background while someone else was in the foreground telling a different story. She named no names. She didn't need to. The room knew the company. The room knew the players. They had watched Declan Calloway command this industry for years and quietly wondered where the substance behind the performance actually came from. Now they knew. When she finished, there was a beat of silence, the particular silence of a room recalibrating. Then the applause began. She stepped back from the podium and walked to her table without looking toward Declan's. She didn't need to confirm what was happening there. The room would do the rest. The acquisition closed 11 weeks later. $61 million. The trust received $32.9 million. Declan's forfeiture was not challenged. After 3 weeks of review and 2 failed preliminary injunctions, his attorneys advised that litigation risk outweighed any potential recovery. He accepted a divorce settlement significantly smaller than what he had anticipated when he began those acquisition conversations. The trust's assets, structured by Edith Calloway's attorney with careful, specific deliberation, were not marital property. They had never been. Priya Vance ended the engagement 4 months after the forum. Mara heard this through the natural circulation of a small industry. She did not seek the information. She felt no satisfaction in it. Or rather, she examined the flicker of something that might have been satisfaction and chose not to feed it. Priya had believed what a charming man told her about himself. Mara had done the same at 27, with less information and more time to learn. Declan eventually moved on, started a consulting practice. His name still circulated occasionally in industry conversations, but with the particular tone that attaches to someone whose story is known. Not destroyed, not permanently disgraced, but known. In this industry, in these rooms, being known was sufficient. There is something important to say about how Mara described all of this, much later, in an interview for a trade publication. The journalist asked what she felt when the acquisition closed. She thought about it genuinely and said, "Stable. I felt stable." The journalist looked confused, expecting something more dramatic. Mara said, "That's not a small thing. It took a long time and a lot of structure to get back to it." The journalist asked whether she felt vindicated. She said, "Vindication implies you were doubted. I was never doubted by anyone who understood the documents. I was only underestimated by people who had decided not to read them carefully. That's not really doubt. It's an oversight." She paused. And oversights have consequences. The journalist asked if she had anything to say to people who felt they had built something that someone else was trying to claim. She said, "Read your documents. All of them. Not the summary, the documents. And find someone like Nadia Osei. Someone who reads them the same way." She paused again. And if your grandmother ever offers to set up a trust for you, listen to her. Listen very carefully. Edith Callaway had built her wealth from laundromats, from a strip mall in Ohio, from a bank investment that outperformed every expectation. She had done it without a college degree, without a financial advisor in the early years, without anyone telling her the money was safe. She had built the structure because she understood, instinctively, that how you hold something determines whether you keep it. When she died, she left everything to Mara inside a legal container no one could reach into without Mara's permission. And she left a handwritten note that read, in its entirety, "The money is yours. The structure is yours. Learn both. Don't let anyone who didn't build this make the decisions about it. Love, Grandma." Mara kept that note in the top drawer of every desk she had ever worked at. It was there the morning Declan came to her office in the Navy suit. It was there the morning she signed the acquisition documents. It was there now, in the drawer of the smaller project she was building entirely on her own. 12 units, mid-market, mixed use, no institutional partners, funded fully by the trust. She had read the note many times. She had never once needed to read it to remember what it said. And so we leave Mara Callaway not performing triumph for anyone. Not bitter. Not celebrating. Just a woman who understood her documents, honored her grandmother's design, and was patient enough to let the room's assumptions run their course before the paperwork spoke. The paperwork always speaks eventually. It speaks without charm, without performance, without a navy suit or a polished handshake. It speaks in clauses and figures and structures that say exactly what they say. And what the document said, in this case, was simple and final. This belongs to Mara. It always had. If this story stayed with you, you know what to do. Hit that like button, because it truly helps us reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't, because we put out new stories every week. Real, grounded, and always about people who were underestimated and came out standing. And leave a comment below. Tell us what hit hardest. Was it the boardroom moment? The valuation gap? Declan waiting in that lobby? Or was it Edith's note? We read every comment. Every single one. We'll see you in the next story.